Since the first men walked the earth long ago in prehistory and looked up into the black ocean of a night sky where they saw countless stars blocked out by a shining white orb, man has longed to destroy the moon.
Well, maybe not, but I'm sure a few astrophotographers have entertained the thought. I know I have from time to time. For most astrophotographers, except perhaps those who enjoy shooting the moon just creates an enormous problem. And it doesn't even have the courtesy to just create an obstacle in the part of the sky it occupies. No, it illuminates the entire sky, creating light that refracts throughout the entire atmosphere and interfering in the process of astrophotography. On nights of a quarter to a half moon, it's typically manageable. But on nights of a full moon, it's almost like having to battle with a second sun in the sky. And this is because the natural light pollution that's emitted by the moon doesn't even have the decency to act like urban light pollution. It's broadband light pollution. Since it's reflecting sunlight, it affects all the frequencies of light, rendering light filters of all kinds somewhat handicapped in dealing with it. But for all the problems the moon can create, there are strategies that can effectively address it. I shot this image of the Pac-Man Nebula over 2 nights across 2 weeks. The first night had an 86% full moon, and the second night had an 81% full moon. But by use of several effective strategies, the effect of the moonlight on the image has been minimized, and what moonlight did manage to creep into the image has been removed. By the way, it was removed without using background extraction tools. I have to confess, I'm not really a fan of background extraction tools. They aren't bad, but all the ones I have tried, in my opinion, remove too much information. So I'd rather just remove backgrounds manually. It's not hard. In fact, in a few minutes you'll see one of the most effective techniques I use to go about doing that. But the bottom line is, there is no reason that you cannot get out and do astrophotography even when the moon is bright. Alright, let's jump into this. Let's learn how to defend against the moon. Since this image was shot during a nearly full moon, and it's a subject that is especially vulnerable to moonlight, I'm going to use this image of the Pac-Man Nebula as an example. Over the course of the lunar cycle, the moon goes through varying phases. It doesn't actually change, of course, just the side facing the sun becomes more and more visible from Earth, which you can see in this clip. As the moon progresses around Earth, we see more and more of its surface becoming illuminated by the sun, and this gives the appearance that the moon is becoming larger. It goes from a sliver of a crescent to a half moon, to a gibbous 3/4 moon, and finally to a full moon, and then the moon wanes, going through those various phases again, until it is that perfect moon that we astrophotographers love, the new moon, which makes us just so happy because the illuminated side is entirely facing away from Earth, giving us the darkest skies possible. There is nothing, of course, that we can do about the phases of the moon, but we can adjust our astrophotography strategies to cope with it. The simplest and easiest strategy available to astrophotographers is to shoot only between the half moon, the new moon, and the next half moon, or perhaps from waning gibbous to waxing gibbous moons. But that kind of strategy limits us a great deal more, because then we are not just limited by the phase of the moon, we're limited by whether or not good weather is going to coincide during the portion of any given month when the moonlight will be at a minimum. So I don't recommend that strategy, especially if you live someplace where the weather is fickle, changes frequently, there are often clouds. It means you're going to miss an awful lot of good nights. A better strategy is to pick your targets based on the phase of the moon. One of the things that I do is that each new moon I pick the targets for the next lunar cycle. During the dark of the moon is an especially exciting time because that's when I can go after those really dim, distant targets that I especially like. I had mentioned in another video that I think of myself as a deep sky astrophotographer. I like to go after those really dark, dim, small, deep sky objects. Very challenging objects that often require a lot of focal length and good skies to deal with. And those will become my dark of the moon targets. In other words, from the time the moon is a waning half moon until it's a new moon, until it's a waxing half moon, those are the kinds of targets I'll go after. The sky is pretty dark during those times. In fact, a half moon is only 1/6 as bright. That's about 17% as bright as a full moon. So there's lots of opportunity from a half moon to a new moon to another half moon to image dim targets. In particular, during this time I am going to go for nebulae, especially nebulae that I know or suspect of having a great deal of very dim and delicate fine structure. The kind of things that are easily, we'll call it, dissolved out by moonlight. And during this time is also a good time to go for galaxies that have a great deal of haze, gaseous, nebulous, or molecular structure around them. And if you're an object hunter, if you're one of those persons who enjoys looking for new astronomical objects in the deep sky, this is a good time to do that as well, because you'll get the maximum contrast in your image. Things that are very dim may show up a bit better. As the moon waxes past the half moon and moonlight brightens across the sky, I go after brighter targets with steeper contrast, fixing my attention more and more on certain galaxies and globular and open star clusters. I may also at this time look for comets or image planets, though I will frequently image emission and reflection nebulae well into the waxing of the moon. It is possible even with color and LRGB imaging, and we'll cover how to do that effectively a little bit further into this video. Here, I am using the free planetarium, Stellarium, to plan my targets in relation to the full moon. The moon is visible to the east, over on the left side, and on this night it's going to be nearly full. By informing Stellarium of my exact position in the world and the date and time, it can show me exactly what phase the moon will be and when exactly it will rise. I've used Stellarium to select the gumball globular cluster on the west half of the sky. This gives me a target that will remain far from the moon, and globular clusters with their sharp contrasts are excellent targets for a full moon. As the moon rises, the cluster will descend, always remaining distant from the moon. Once the moon crosses into the western half of the sky, I'll pick a suitable target on the east half of the sky. That way, the moon will again remain far from the target all through the night, and as it descends and its light decreases, my target will rise further and further into the sky, where it can be filmed ever more sharply. Also, as I live at a northern latitude, when the moon is up, it is usually over in the southern third of the sky. So when the moon is dark, I will go after targets that I have been after on the southern half of the sky. As the lunar phase waxes from half to 3/4, I will likewise shift my targets to things that are more or less overhead and further away from the moon. When the moon is between 1/2 and 3/4 full, I will try to keep objects at least 90 degrees away from the moon. It's not a hard number though. Some DSOs, like star clusters, can tolerate more moonlight. But it's a rule of thumb, at least 90 is preferable, and further if I can. Once the moon goes beyond 3/4 and the night sky becomes very bright, I will pick targets well to the north, almost on the opposite side of the sky from the full moon. That way, the light from the full moon will be spread roughly evenly over the target, and it's easier to remove even lighting than a gradient. But because it's on the opposite side of the sky, moonlight will affect the target less. If you live well into the northern or southern latitudes, you may wish to apply a similar strategy. And you can also use Stellarium to determine where the moon will be on a night that you are planning to shoot. You can even use Stellarium to calculate how many degrees away from the moon your target will be during that night. To enter your coordinates in Stellarium, go to the vertical control bar on the left side of the desktop and click the topmost icon with the compass symbology. If you hover your mouse cursor over it, you'll see it's labeled Location Window. When the window opens, you can enter your latitude, longitude, and elevation, and Stellarium will present the sky at any date and time from that part of the world. To change the date, go down to the clock icon, click it, and in the date and time window that pops up, you can change the date by clicking the up or down arrows or typing in any number. Presently, I'm looking at the moon phase a week from the time of the making of this video, and as you can see at that point, the moon will be nearly full. I can then find my target of interest for that night, and use Stellarium to calculate how far away the moon will be from it. Using Stellarium, I can see that the Pac-Man Nebula will be over 100 degrees from the moon. I should be able to work with that by targeting only the high-frequency information. That's a topic we'll cover a bit later on in the video. Let's talk about the use of filters to defend against the moon. Unfortunately, the moon is a broadband emitter. It reflects sunlight, which comes to us in all frequencies. So, unlike man-made light pollution, which is generated at specific frequencies, the light pollution created by the moon covers the full spectrum, and this means that filters such as narrowband filters will be of limited usefulness in defending against it. But they are not useless. In fact, even LRGB filters can be used to defend against the moon. The trick is in timing. In the visible range, the atmosphere mostly refracts blue light. After that, it mostly refracts green light. And after that, it mostly refracts red light. So the effect of the moon on the atmosphere will be strongest in the blue range, second strongest in the green range, and weakest in the red range. Knowing this, you can time how you're going to use filters for a mono camera. If there's going to be a bright moon during that night, gather your blue information before the moon rises or after it sets, or at least when it's low on the east or west horizon. So for narrowband imaging, this would be your H-beta data, presuming you're gathering H-beta data. And for LRGB users, this would be your blue filter. As the moon gets to be a little over the horizon, switch to the filter that works in the green part of the spectrum. For those shooting in LRGB, that would be your green filter, and for those shooting in narrowband, that would be your O3 filter. If I'm working on the night of a full moon, I'll switch to the green filter once the moon is about 5 degrees over the horizon and use it till the moon is about 15 degrees over the horizon. If the moon is full or near full, say over 80%, once the moon is 15 degrees or more over the horizon, I'll switch to the red filter or HA or S2, either for the rest of the night or until the moon begins to set much later when it goes below 15 degrees. And if you are shooting in LRGB, you may be wondering what to do with the luminance filter, the L filter. The L filter allows a mono camera to gather a lot of light. Using an L filter, a mono camera will gather light roughly twice as fast as a color camera, but it allows all the visible frequencies of light to pass, and this includes the moonlight, which may interfere with your image. So for really clean luminance data, it is best to treat the L filter like a blue filter, which means using it before the moon comes up till while the moon is still low on the horizon. You may, at your option, and if you are confident you can scrub out the moonlight from your image, treat the L filter like a green filter, and use the L filter till the moon is higher in the sky. Just be aware your image will show more interference from the moon and require more scrubbing to get it looking good. This scrubbing is far from impossible, but it does make the work more advanced and more complicated. Once the moon is creating significant brightness in the sky, if it's a full moon, say over 15 degrees, and less the closer your target is to the full moon. Stick with your red filter if you are shooting RGB or LRGB, and stick with your HA or S2 filters if you are shooting narrowband. Alright, let's cover scrubbing moonlight from an image. This is the Pac-Man Nebula, which you saw at the beginning of this video, and as I mentioned, I shot this on one night when there was an 86% full moon, and another night when there was an 81% full moon. I applied all the strategies I've discussed so far, choosing a target that was over 100 degrees from the moon, I think it was around 120 or 130 degrees, and I timed the use of the filters to coincide with the changing light. The blue filter was used before the moon came up till it was low about 5 degrees on the horizon, the green filter till the moon was about 5 to 15 degrees on the horizon, and the red filter for the rest of the night. And I captured luminance information while also getting blue and green information. Now that helped, but the original image after processing was still riddled with moonlight. In fact, it looked like this. Let's compare them side by side. I'll place the image prior to scrubbing the last of the moonlight from it on the left, and the scrubbed image on the right. As you can see, the scrubbed version of the image has sharper contrast, richer colors, better transition between light and shadow, and cleaner space. And it wasn't hard to do this without using a background extraction tool. Let me show you how. I've opened the image prior to scrubbing the moonlight in Affinity Photo. As you can see, the developing is nearly complete. If you look in the space around the nebula, you can see that the moonlight is mostly affecting the image in the blue and green colors, which is entirely to be expected. And what we want to do is remove that blue and green effect. Happily, the effect lends itself to editing. Because we have shot far from the moon, and been careful to use only the right filters at the right time, the effect of the blue and the green is of low brightness. This means that all we have to do is remove the trace of blue and green at the very bottom of the light curve. I could do this with the curves tool, but that would affect the entire light curve, which I can then adjust, but it adds extra unnecessary steps. So I'm going to use the levels tool, where I can make this adjustment more efficiently and also have control of gamma, which we'll need later. Since the red and blue ranges are powerfully affected by changes on the green channel, I'm going to start with the green. And I'm going to increase the black point on green by 2%. As you can see, that effectively gets rid of the green's impact in the lowest ranges of the image. Now the green that was just removed was surplus green that was put there by the moon's impact on the atmosphere. And when it's gone, its impact on the nebula itself is also removed. This enhances the play of light and shadow, improves the contrast, and intensifies the red and blue colors within the nebula. I haven't actually taken anything away from the image, I've just specifically scrubbed away the impact of the green color that was induced by the moonlight's effect on the atmosphere. Now I want to constrain the impact of the green out of the space entirely and keep a natural green impact within the nebula, so I'll crank up the gamma, and it tightens down where green can appear within the image, restricting its appearance to brighter areas. That also helps us lose the impact of the moonlight in the dark space. Now, the dark space provides a looking glass. Away from the light of the nebula, it allows us clearly to see the impact of the moonlight in the image. In the dark space, we can see that there is lingering blue that was induced by the moon within the image. Using the same levels tool, we're going to go ahead and remove it. I'll switch to the blue channel and apply the same technique. First, I'll lift the black point, 1% does the trick, and then I'll increase the blue channel's gamma to confine the appearance of blue to the nebulosity. Finally, I'll make a small adjustment on the red. While the red is resistant to the effects of moonlight, it's not impervious. I don't really need to raise the black points on the red, but I will raise the gamma just a little bit, just to pull the red out of the appearance of the dark space around the nebula, just a hair. And this gives us our final cleaned up image. Then I opened up another levels tool and used it to increase the white level of the red and the blue, which intensifies their appearance. This compensated for removing the impacts of the moonlight on the image. When the scrubbing of the moonlight background is done, and the restoration of the lost information is completed by intensifying the red and blue within the image, this finished image became the outcome. Alright, now we're going to cover one last technique you can use for defending against the moon. You can steal the high-frequency information right out from under the moonlight. To illustrate, I'm going to use this data of the Pac-Man Nebula that I shot on night 1 when the moon was at 86% illumination. I've made no effort to scrub the moonlight from this image, and as you can see, the image is a mess. The moonlight has impacted the image heavily. So how does this stealing high-frequency information work? Low-frequency information is what gives an image its brightness and color, and high-frequency information defines the detail. Well, moonlight mostly affects the low-frequency information, and even if it is too affected for me to save it, I can strip the high-frequency information out of that image and apply it to information that I've either gathered previously or will gather in the future. This matters because it takes longer to gather high-frequency information than low-frequency information. So even on nights of a very bright moon, by stealing the high-frequency information, you can get valuable integration time accomplished. Here's how it's done. I've opened the image in Affinity Photo. You can see the stars have been removed. And then I'm going to go up to the Filters menu at the top of Affinity Photo, click it, and move down to where it says Frequency Separation. I can then slide the radius slider bar to the right, just a little for fine information, about 2/3 of the way for moderate information, and all the way if I want all the high frequency information. The left side of the image on the desktop shows you what the high frequency information would look like with the radius where it is. And the right side of the image on the desktop shows you what the low frequency information would look like with that much of the high frequency information extracted. Let's go ahead and extract all the high frequency information. We now have a separate high frequency and low frequency layer. If I turn off the high frequency layer, you can see the low frequency stuff is very blurry. If I turn off the low frequency layer, you can see the high frequency information appears as something like a penciled sketch of the image. A little bit of saturation bleeds into the high frequency, but not much. And if you wanted to remove that, you could just desaturate it with the Vibrance tool. So you might be thinking, so what? How does this help me with moonlight in an image? Well, you can export that high frequency information and then drag it over to other information. I'm going to bring it to the information that I gathered on night 2. Then I'm going to drag that high frequency information into the image, and I'm going to very quickly visually align it to the image. I know some persons are intimidated by the idea of visually aligning information, but it's very easy in Affinity Photo. You can zoom in right down to the pixel and simply make sure the pixels line up over each other. With just a pinch of practice, this only takes moments. So high frequency information is normally composited over the rest of the information with linear light, but I find linear light to be too strong in astrophotos, so I will switch it later, but for right now I'm going to use it because as you can see, the linear light composite allows the new high frequency information to show up very sharply over the old high frequency information, which helps align the information in moments. But once the new high frequency layer is aligned, you can see the linear light composite is just too stark, so I'll switch it to the soft light mode, and you can see the composite becomes soft, gentle, and beautiful. Now let's pull back and take a look at what happened to this image when I added the high frequency information from the night of the full moon, where the low frequency information, the light and color, was shot with moonlight and almost ruined. I'll turn that new high frequency information off. Notice the image becomes softer. I turn it back on, the image becomes sharper. Back off, it becomes softer. Back on, it becomes sharper. The delicate and precise high-frequency information is the most tedious and time-consuming to gather, and it has been extracted from an image that was ruined by moonlight pollution and applied to another image to improve the quality of that image. This works because it doesn't take as much time to gather low-frequency information as it does to gather high-frequency information. Your camera accumulates brightness and color information comparatively quickly compared to high-frequency information. And since high-frequency information is just black and white information, it is impacted a lot less by moonlight. Moonlight can affect it a little, but not nearly as much as low-frequency information. And you can correct a lot of what moonlight can do to high-frequency information with synergistic sharpening, which I covered in another video, wherein you strategically apply first the unsharp mask, then the clarity tool, then the high-pass filter to the high-frequency information. And thus, we see that whether there is no moon or a full moon, you can get good quality information, so long as the weather itself allows. There's nothing that we can do about clouds in the way, but we can, to a degree, pierce the haze of moonlight. As always, I hope this helps you to improve your astrophotography and your enjoyment of the whole process. Applying these techniques should certainly give you more time with your telescope under the stars. If you have any thoughts, observations, or questions, please leave them in the comments section below. And as always, thank you for watching. And thank you to everybody who has subscribed to this channel, hits that like button. I still can't believe, like almost 5,200 subscribers. How did that happen? I really appreciate it, everybody. The Sky Story channel has just turned into an amazing community. Thank you to everyone for participating. Now, have a blast doing astrophotography. I once again have good weather coming, so I'm going to prep the observatory soon. As for you, get out there and shoot that sky.